everybody, welcome to this session on securely working from anywhere without a VPN. My name is Adela Vaccaro. I am a security and compliance product specialist at Google Cloud. The objective for the next 20 minutes is to walk you through a new way of providing access to your organization's applications, which takes into account context-based access decisions, a model which evolved with the application landscape and the current working demands of nowadays. With that in mind, in order to achieve that, today we will walk through the following. First, we'll have a look at the perimeter-based approach and why we actually need a new model here. Then we'll see how Google redesigned its own access model based on identity and context in a model called Beyond Corp. Then we'll have a look at how you can replicate this approach in your organization with components that you have available on Google Cloud for you. Finally, we'll have a look at the concrete next steps to get you started with this yourself. First of all, let's look at why we actually need a new approach here. Historically, as we moved to working from anywhere, anytime, companies needed to make IT resources available outside of the office. We've been using a perimeter-based defense model, mostly with VPNs. And in order to address this new way of working, we wanted to provide access to company resources outside of the office. The promise of VPNs was that you can do your work regardless of where you are and what device you're using. Recently, with the increased mobile workforce and also the variety of employee devices, we see this perimeter shifting. With the move to cloud-based services, some corporate services are no longer in this perimeter. Also, you might need to provide access to certain resources to more than just your employees nowadays. This can include your vendors, contractors, or partners. The recent COVID-19 pandemic changed the way people engage with each other and increased remote work. The VPN-based approach or perimeter-based approach showed that VPNs are not entirely prepared to address this new way of working. With the increased home working demands and companies needing to provide secure access to internal apps for employees and extended workforce as quickly as possible, VPNs have run into a few shortcomings. VPNs pose a few managerial and administrative challenges. The setup is hard to manage and scale, making it cumbersome for the admins. VPN's deployment takes time and requires both resources and costs on licensing, available bandwidth, and number of appliances. From an end user perspective, users are faced with limitations such as the amount of time they can be connected to, or challenges connecting or authenticating. Also, a limit in the number of devices that an employee can connect to. The current perimeter-based approach does not adapt to new security challenges posed by our evolving application landscape. The access levels are not built in. We cannot provide different access types to clients, to partners, employees, or vendors. Also, we cannot control the security posture of the devices used to access the corporate resources. Finally, we cannot provide granular application-based level access because with the security at the perimeter model, once you are in the network, you have access to many different resources. Imagine you are a contractor who needs to work on your CRM application. Once you are inside the network, you also get access to the ERP or anything else. Let's look at a different approach in order to achieve this. How could we redesign a different model of access for current demands? Let's take a finance application as an example. Ideally, we'd only like to provide access to these applications for finance employees only. Secondly, we'd like to ensure access only from devices which are managed and have a proper security posture in place. Also, I'd like to take into account context signals like the location I'm signing in from as a finance employee. If I typically sign in during regular office hours from Frankfurt, if there is an access from another part of the world in the middle of the night, I'd like to be alerted of this kind of non-typical behavior. I'd also like to enforce strong second factor authentication for the finance employees, as financial company data is sensitive and I would like to ensure proper access, also over an encrypted connection. Ideally, I would like to be able to fine-tune this kind of granular control for all my applications. So how would we go about designing such a solution? At Google, we started the journey to answer these type of questions around 10 years ago, when we redesigned our whole model for access management. We call this model Beyond Core, which stands for Beyond the Corporate Network. The core principle was that we wanted to enable every Google employee to work successfully from anywhere, from any device, and also without needing a VPN. The Beyond Core model consists of different components working together and has three key ideas. The first one, we want to allow every employee to connect from any network and only get access based on the context of the connection, more specifically on user and device context. Secondly, we would like to have every access request being authenticated, authorized, and encrypted all the time, and not just for the initial connection. Finally, we want to give IT and security teams control to be able to create granular access levels for your applications. Let's now have a look at what pieces Google used to be able to implement this model. This shows the high-level architecture of the components used in the Beyond Corp approach at Google. The first step is the identity. We would like to understand those users, and we need accurate, up-to-date information on all of them. Information might include who's the user, what do they need to do, what kind of access do they need, do they use strong second factor? Once we've understood our users with a user inventory, the next step is a device inventory. Similarly, we need accurate and up-to-date information about any devices accessing corporate services. Examples include which machines are managed, what state are they in, is the operating system up to date, do I have my patches installed, or do I have antivirus protection turned on? The next step is with this data to build a trust model around our devices. And we do this with the rules engine. This is where we define those authorization rules. Contexts such as the device security status and the location are utilized to score how trustworthy a connection should be. We then create human-readable rules that take into account this context, and we apply them at scale across our application and our infrastructure. Finally, we have an enforcement point. At Google, this is a reverse proxy which sits in front of every data request and applies those policies that we defined in the rules engine. This proxy also enforces encryption between user and application data, as well as protection against DDoS and TLS termination. Now that you've seen how Google developed the Beyond Corp model internally, let's look at how you can replicate this model with Google Cloud Solution. Here is the high-level solution of the externalized Beyond Corp model and the corresponding components in Google Cloud. We call this model context-aware access. It's a suite of solutions rather than a singular one. We look at each component separately in the following part. You can see this model is very similar to what Google developed internally. We have both user and device information, we have a rules engine to define policies, and we have an enforcement point. This is because we use the model battle-tested in Google's 10 years journey, as well as the lessons learned along the way to give the customers the same capability. You can extend this model on any type of infrastructure scenario. So the first piece of starting on a zero trust journey is the identity. We want to gather a user inventory. In Google Cloud, this is Cloud Identity. This is our own identity system where you can manage users, groups, and role information. Cloud Identity provides also other capabilities. At Google, we have a massive system that does logging abuse detection. This is the same system that we use on our consumer side, and we also use it in Google Cloud. And with it, we can detect fraudulent login attempts. Remember my example previously. If I sign in from a different location than normally, the system would be able to detect and alert me on that. Now, we want to enforce strong second factor or multi-factor authentication. Internally at Google, we use FIDO UTF keys, and we recommend them because they are very phishing resistant. We also provide our customers the ability to use the same technology with Titan keys. Finally, the ability to define session control. For every application out there, you should have unique session controls, and with Cloud Identity, you can adjust those for the needs of every application individually. Next, we have our device inventory. We want to differentiate between different tiers of devices, the type of access, and their security posture. We provide a few solutions here. The main one is endpoint verification. This is a browser-based solution allowing you to understand the security posture of your devices. Like for example, do you have screen lock enabled? What kind of operating system version are you on? Do you have disk encryption turned on that device? Also, if you are a G Suite customer, G Suite's MDM solution also helps us gather this kind of information. We also take into account other aspects of the device, such as the location and time of the request. And these are provided by Google's infrastructure. Next, the Access Context Manager gives us the ability to define and manage granular access levels needed for each application, giving the capability to create rules and policies around levels of trust. An example of such a rule can be, I only want devices with the latest version of the operating system and coming from a specific IP geolocation to be able to access the most secure systems of the company. We also want to be able to scale these rules across the application landscape. Finally, we've collected this information, we've created our rules, now we'd like to enforce them. If you run a web application on GCP, on Google, on other clouds, or on-premise, you need to be able to protect that through the rules that you have previously defined in the Access Context Manager. For web applications or virtual machines hosted on Google Cloud, the enforcement point is the Identity Aware Proxy, or IAP. This basically looks at the identity and context and enforces access decisions. And IAP is also able to do TCP and SSH connections as well. Now let's have a look at some use cases in practice, inspired by a few of our customers who have implemented Beyond Corp components. Let's say you have a company called Zotkix IT. Zotkix has an HR application hosted on Google Cloud. The employees would like to access their application without a VPN from anywhere. So we go ahead and we configure application access via the Identity Aware Proxy and the Access Context Manager. And we enforce a policy that employees can access the application from anywhere. Let's see the user experience as a user tries to log into the HR application. So here we have Alice, and she's working from her home Wi-Fi. She's trying to access the HR application. The identity system is prompting Alice to log in and is asking her for her username, which she inputs, and as well for her password. As the authentication flow completes, the SSO is redirecting Alice to the HR application. We see that she didn't configure any VPN before she tried to log in, because the identity-aware proxy knows that she is allowed access due to the rules that we've defined. Let's now look at another use case, this time providing access for contractors. We'd like to give them a more restricted type of access. More specifically, we would like to enforce that the contractors should use, firstly, secure authentication, and secondly, only access from the office. So as a contractor, let's say I'm actually working in the company Wi-Fi, which is Acme Corp Wi-Fi. The contractor is trying to also access the HR application and is being prompted by the same identity system for the username and for the password. I see an additional step here. I'm being prompted for second step verification because I enforced this for my contractor. After that, I'm being redirected to the HR application automatically. If I'm not on the company premises, as a contractor, I shouldn't have any access. So let's say that this time the contractor took his laptop and he went on a Starbucks public Wi-Fi. The contractor is trying again to access the same HR application. The identity system already recognizes the contractor and is only asking the contractor for the password. The second step verification is being triggered again. It completes, but this time the authentication flow leads to an access denied page where the contractor also has the contact of the administrator to contact just in case. So now that you've seen the context-aware access model in practice, let's see how you can get started. This model can be adapted gradually. Here are 5 steps on how you can get started on this journey to enforce contextual-based access decisions yourself. First, identify a POC application, a focused internal application use case. For example, you can take a web-based company dashboard and you define access for different types of users. The admins on company-managed laptops need access to the web-based dashboard from anywhere. Contractors from their laptops need access to this dashboard only from the office. Secondly, configure a enforcement point, which can be a proxy, in order to route traffic to this internal application. Then you can take this application and implement user-based rules. You can start with a user or a group-based access rule. For example, the group composed of the admins has access to dashboard.company.com. You can then extend this rule to be context-aware. You can feed information from your mobile device management, or MDM, or other device agents into user session information. Finally, to make it easier for our customers to take the first step into this direction, we've launched a cloud solution that enables simple and secure access to internal web applications hosted either in the cloud or on premises from virtually any device, anywhere, without needing a remote access VPN. This solution is called Beyond Core Remote Access. On this slide are a few helpful links and a few more details on this recent launch and the components mentioned along the talk. Our objective today was to look at a different access model to your company's application, a model battle tested at Google and which we believe is suited to the evolving application landscape and the working demands of nowadays. I hope you found this model helpful and you can take a few pieces to adopt in your organization. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this talk. Goodbye.